Okay, so this is 2019 Bihar Encephalitis Outbreak. So today's discussion is about this AES, okay, outbreak in Bihar. This is 2019, but this has been the first case is recorded since 1995. And in 2013, there were 144 deaths, and 2014 there are 355 deaths. 2015 there are 11 deaths, 4 and all that. So notice there is a drastic change here. So the cure is almost instantaneous. The cure here is give them sugar water. You are stopping most of them from dying, right? They get into this complicated, fatal inflammation in the brain. Solution is you give them sugar water. How come sugar water becomes a solution for such a complex problem? They actually, put this into perspective. So the cause was not known. Hey, is it due to heat stroke? Is it due to a viral infection? Okay. Is it due to, say, probably some kind of poisoning? The cause was not known. Someone had to do this, solve this inverse problem. What is the cause? To figure out IV dextrose, sugar water is actually a simple solution. This is a story that I want to go a little deeper in. How many of you are interested? This is specifically children were dying due to acute encephalitis syndrome. Okay. Does anyone know what this encephalitis is? I suppose so. Most of you know this etymology. So there is itis, inflammation, encephalo. Okay, there is somewhere inflammation in the brain. Yeah. So today's discussion is about this. Okay, and we'll come back to this page perhaps. See, notice this lychee fruit poisoning is a very, very, very complex problem. Problems typically have barriers. This is one problem that has a knowledge barrier. That is, the knowledge itself is not easily accessible, readily accessible. Even for an expert, okay, this is somewhat hard. In fact, I should say this upfront. This is also one of the first discussions that we are having. Okay, at least for me, this was really hard. One reason being that just on this, you need expertise from multiple fields. At least fortunately, the problem right now is reasonably well understood. I'll try to make it simpler and I will try to make it accessible using some simple analogies and all of that. Let's take this basic metabolism. Typically, so most of you know that this thing, right? So you have, this is metabolism 101. We have seen this in HAP, I suppose, right? Anatomy and physiology. Proteins break down into amino acids. At least I mentioned there is something called citric acid cycle. And you get ATP from that. Only new thing that I put up here is this thing called acetyl-CoA. Even that is that is not that important. Okay, the glucose that typically here. Glucose that is typically here. So think of a malnourished child, and based on our context, the child is in Bihar. Probably the child missed the evening meal on the previous day. Okay, because probably the meal wasn't there, and what they have access to is, only this lychee fruit. Lychee fruit, because this lychee fruit, there is this season going on. Lychee fruit is getting harvested. At least the kids find easy access to it. And that fruit ends up becoming a poison. At least components in the food. Toxins, there are some toxins which kind of stop some important pathways here. Okay, and none of your body parts gets energy. Your heart is always beating. It needs energy to run. Your brain is also always active. There is a basal energy requirement, and if there is no energy supply, okay, brain cannot work, and sick, and the situation kind of acutely explodes and gets complicated. So in this case, the child eats lychee fruit, and there are toxins there, leading to this acute inflammation, acute encephalopathy. Again, to give you some analogy so that you could better appreciate this, okay, just for analogy purposes, okay, so energy, I am going to compare that with money, okay. So notice this is like your polysaccharides, carbohydrates, glucose specifically, this is like your currency, money. This is what your this is a currency for all the cells in the body. Basic functioning uses currency, okay, that is, there is energy, and then uh, processes can run, okay. And then here fats are like gold. If you gold is gold is equivalent to currency. At least there are places where you can go give gold and get currency. And then there is proteins. So I'm going to, analogously, I'm going to make them as realistic. Okay. What is happening with this child is, of course, the child is typically malnourished from a poor region, did not have that evening meal. Okay. So the body is low on carbohydrates, low on meal was low on meal. There wasn't any meal. So the body is low on glucose. Okay. Malnourished child, the body, body is low on fat as well as protein. But it so happens that there is some very little fat, okay, can, possibly at least keep this system running, okay. And the important step there is something called beta-oxidation. There is some very little amount of fat which body can at least sustain, let's say, okay. So that is how the body is. This is typically early in the morning, pre-dawn and all that, okay. Early in the morning, body has exhausted its glucose resources, no stored glucose, no stored glycogen, or very little stored glycogen, too much of protein, very little fat. The sad story here is that at least there is some light here, right? That is, any little fat, okay, can possibly supply energy. State is that the children go eat lychee, which blocks this. It kind of blocks even this pathway, okay. And then the body goes into a vicious spiral, leading to acute encephalopathy, which has like fatality rate is pretty high. We can go back to that Wikipedia page and look at some statistics. So this is a problem, and also showed you 2014 the number of deaths were pretty high. 2015 the deaths all of a sudden like decreased. There was like a tenfold decrease, order of magnitude decrease, something like that. So they somehow found a cure, right? Does anyone know what the cure is? So child comes to a hospital. So this symptoms of acute encephalopathy. Okay. So what do you think is the cure in this case? Can anyone make a guess? So this problem has been happening for like since 1995. Okay, at least has been documented since 1995. And also there is something called ackee fruit poisoning in Kenya. Kind of pretty much goes through the same story that we are looking at. So interestingly, so the cure is almost instantaneous, and this goes by the name IV dextrose. Can anyone like infer what this is and what this IV dextrose is? The cure here is give them sugar water. You are stopping most of them from dying, right? They get into this complicated, fatal inflammation in the brain. Solution is you give them sugar water, and they are okay. And of course, now that's that's an acute fix. Over time, the children need to be fed properly, right? And that acute, you know, at least in an empty stomach, this lychee fruit and all that should be avoided, right? So the question is, I already kinda gave you the picture, but this page, on this stage, some of you should be surprised. How come sugar water becomes a solution for such a complex problem? To actually, put this into perspective, I already gave you the mechanism. Okay, so the cause was not known. Hey, is it due to heat stroke? Is it due to a viral infection? Okay, is it due to say probably some kind of poisoning? The cause was not known. Someone had to do this, solve this inverse problem. What is the cause? To figure out IV dextrose, sugar water is actually a simple solution. This is a story that I want to go a little deeper in. How many of you are interested? See, one of the things is, someone tells you a basic metabolism, there is citric acid cycle, this, and all that, right? As a biomedical engineer, should I know this? Right? That's a very typical question. Hey, should I memorize this for, say one more question shows up, should I really memorize that? Typical perspective is that, right? But notice, for someone to actually solve that inverse problem, they needed that in-depth knowledge on fields that was not necessarily in their comfort zone or in their area of expertise. For example, this problem involved problems with epidemiology, field epidemiology, right? Children are dying in one particular region, typically high in one particular season, summer, so temperatures are very high. And then when they actually found out the cause, this happened to be a plant-based toxin. And this has complications of viral infection and things like that. So there is this Japanese fever that was very similar and things like that. And someone also need to understand pediatric nutrition. So not just adult nutrition, they have to understand, hey, this is a complication primarily in children. So the same lychee fruit, if an adult eats it, it's not problematic. And in fact, the same lychee fruit, if it is unripe, it is more problematic. If it is like ripe, it is like gets relatively less problematic. So some of these details weren't really evident before the cause was found, and the solution was also totally not evident before the cause was found. So do you want to go a little deeper into this? So at this stage, we have a couple of questions. So children, and then morning, and then sugar water is, sugar water, and then encephalopathy or encephalitis. There are of course few other things, why summer, a couple of things, but at least why children. So why sugar water solves this and all of that. So someone is, typically fasting intentionally or like unintentionally. They didn't have the food or like they decided to fast. Typically, so if you do fasting, your blood glucose is low. Glucose is low, what happens? This most of you know. So there is okay, now I have to distinguish a couple of things. So if blood glucose is low, no, most of you know what happens. Increase in glucagon. What secretes glucagon? Alpha cells of pancreas. Gate question, right? So this is glucagon. And okay, someone is curious, I'll also get back to this. There is also typically increase in epinephrine. So I'll come back to this epinephrine if someone reminds me or special curious. So what does this glucagon do? Of course, there is in the liver, there is typically some glucose stored as glycogen. So there is glycogenolysis, where glycogen gets broken down into glucose. Stored glucose becomes available glucose. So this process continues until the body runs out of glycogen. So at this time, the body runs out of glycogen. That is, the glucose reserves get consumed. Low glycogen. At this stage, our body always has backups. There is always redundancies. Body is there in a very, very hostile world. Okay, hostile or very, very livable world. You can say it whichever way. Earth is the only living planet we are aware of, right? But even there, it's not necessarily very friendly. It's in a very hostile world. Okay, and there are always backup plans to deal with issues, noises, all of that. Okay, so in this case, of course, the glucose gives you the energy required, ATP, right? It goes through this acetyl CoA. Okay, and then citric acid cycle, you get energy there. There are also other options available here. So the most important being, so the first resource that you go to was, you start selling gold or start mortgaging gold, right? So the body has this fatty acids through a process called beta-oxidation. This makes acetyl-CoA and ATP. So if I go back there, there is beta-oxidation, oxidation, and this gives you some of the components required to something. Okay, so this feeds into actually two processes. One is now your body starts finding bits and pieces and starts forming glucose. So from bits and pieces to glucose, starts putting pieces together to make glucose that consumes energy, which comes from beta oxidation. Some of the components involved also comes from beta oxidation. So this goes by the name gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis. So it finds bits and pieces, starts forming gluconeogenesis, and also some of this acetyl CoA, there is some excess. It can also fat into ketones, an alternative source of fuel, alternative for glucose. Okay, temporary alternative, let's say. So this is known as ketogenesis. Gluconeogenesis, get glucose at the end of it. Gluconeogenesis, ketones. You can get ATP from this. It's again transportable, can easily cross the blood-brain barrier. So the brain again has at least a temporary source of fuel, alternate fuel. This gives you ketones. Okay, this is bits and pieces putting together, and this is primarily fatty acids to ketones. Okay, temporary alternative fuel. Of course, this itself is fuel. So this is what typically happens. So this is body is low on glucose. There is a homeostatic response. There is glycogen breaking down into glucose, and the glycogen also runs out. There is beta-oxidation, okay, where fatty acids, become acetyl CoA, and you also get some energy. That energy goes to these two processes. So now there is something called MCPG, and there is also something called hypoglycin. Case is specifically MCPG. Okay, so these are the two toxins, plant-derived toxins. Okay, so the lychee fruit specifically has this MCPG. Specifically, the unripe fruit has this particular toxin. Okay, so when we call something a toxin, what it does is it blocks or overrides some of this pathways that are available. Okay, so in this case, it blocks this step, the survival, redundant survival process that life put into, that kind of life evolutionally figured out, right? It kind of goes and blocks that. Okay, in fact, it goes and blocks the very first step of beta oxidation. Okay, it inhibits that. It inhibits an enzyme that is key in forming acetyl CoA. This is acetyl CoA dehydrogenase. Goes inhibits that, and from then on, alternate paths not possible. Ketogenesis not possible. How does your brain, the neurons or excitatory cells, right? So they have all these ion channels, neurotransmitters, right? They are continuously getting on and off, right? They need energy to sustain, not energy to work. They need energy to sustain. Okay, else sodium potassium balance goes out of place. This glutamate, some of the neurotransmitters goes balance goes out of place, and so the moment you have this ion and neurotransmitter imbalance, right, you have of course there is going to be both inflammation, as well as there is going to be abnormal amounts of water, edema, or again encephalopathy. So your brain gets damaged very, very, very fast. So here the brain basally needs basal energy requirement for basic functioning. The brain, the next to the heart, the brain has all these ion channels: heart, brain, kidney. Three things with, like, there's lots of ion channels. Of course, the spinal cord, nervous system, right? So there is a basal, even just to sustain every heartbeat, the heart needs energy, right, to put back the sodium potassium in place after depolarization, repolarization, right? There is a basal energy demand that is not met. Soon there is this ionic, soon there is balance. Also, what is somewhat very dire in this case is that this is somewhat vicious, in the sense that, okay, no one asked me this, but let me say. So your brain is already alert because this is low on, it kind of sensed some danger. This is low on glucose. So it's alert, it kind of needs more energy, putting it into a higher basal energy demand. So the alertness fuels the fire, and sooner or later it takes a hit. Organs get affected, but the brain cannot really take a long hit. Why children? Typically, at least some of the glycogen content on all that, alternative sources here, alternative currencies, or something that is alternative assets, something that is monetizable, that is built over a time, and children relatively have much lesser amounts of, say, stored glycogen compared to adults. Okay, so children are more vulnerable, and they are malnourished. They didn't have an evening meal to start with. Why mornings? So overnight the brain was sleeping, but it was still consuming energy. Okay, and they didn't have a food. The glucose dip is the highest in the morning, lowest glucose level in the morning, and your body is trying to restart, and your brain needs more energy. And that stage, of course, you thought kind of at least feeds your hunger momentarily, ignorantly, and very sadly, that put a halt on, that blocked one important um, life process, one important redundant pathway there, right? So this was the lifeboat, but that got blocked. The cables to that are all cut now, and that cannot function, and the brain cannot really take it long. Morning they are at least the previous night they were perhaps feeling hunger. Morning suddenly there is like all sorts of fatal complications. So now when someone figured out, hey, all this is okay, beta MCPG blocks beta oxidation, oxygenation, something like that. I'm trying to rhyme with that, I suppose. So beta oxidation, right? But the problem beta oxidation is required is because, first of all, okay, there is no glycogen content, but to begin with, there is no glucose in the body. Replenish that, increase blood glucose level as soon as possible. The brain basal energy requirement that it needs, okay, and of course the rest of the body to start functioning, and of course the body gets back on course itself. So that is why for a fatal disease that was so complicated that killed hundreds of children, solution is sugar water. Give them sugar water, they are all right. Okay, evening or the next day they are ready to be they are ready, they are treated. So see, again, to see this in a perspective, when someone says, okay, this is going on, it makes sense, but someone had to figure it out, right? That process was extremely hard. Okay, yeah, this combines field epidemiology, pediatric nutrition. You also need to know infectious diseases, know symptoms of viral disease complications. They really had to put together a couple of very different pieces. So this is typically a team of doctors and all that, but at least the mechanism that I understood through a work published on 2014 by a doctor named John Jacob. Okay, I understood through his work. Okay, fine. So this is what is going on here. So now let's go back and look at that Wikipedia file. See, this is one place where at least one takeaway is. Let me tell you, okay, a couple of things. So at least, so I have showed citric acid cycle. This is there in the HAP notes and all of that, but we kind of overlook it. Even some of this data is proteins, amino acids. So some of this is overlooked, right? If one more question shows up, what's the point? I'm a biomedical engineer. That kind of if that kind of thinking was there, this inverse problem wouldn't have been, the solution wouldn't have been found in the first place. Okay, so this knowledge, this curiosity is important, and knowing details, whatever you're doing, okay, doing it properly is very important. So even, for example, if you didn't know about the steps that I showed, so glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, right? Then there is glycolysis. So there are a couple of confusing terms here. So one is, no, unless there is a curiosity to really understand that. In this case, the real world solution was really, really, really out of reach. Point number one. And in fact, so metabolism, even though, what I discussed is metabolism 101, okay? Again, a clean picture was very far away, okay? And so in fact, I learned better metabolism, better details on what is going on, better physiology, because I was curious about this problem. Okay, in fact, most of the knowledge I pick up is out of curiosity. When I get curious until I get satisfactory answers, right? I don't stop. That is, most of the things that I picked up, that's how I picked up. So again, pick real world problems, start there, and you have better chances of learning and keeping that in your memory longer. There is also better motivation for you, right? And that is one more thing. This needs awareness, curiosity, awareness, and whatnot. So total 872 cases of encephalitis, including 176 deaths, were reported in Bihar in 2019.